Hello, everybody. Thank you all again for joining the Metaverse Summit Roadshow. It is a series of interviews around the Metaverse, all kinds of topics around AR, VR, around gaming, around Web3, around blockchain. So today we have the honor to invite Amy Peck as a guest speaker. Can you tell us who you are, Amy, and then where are you based?
Yeah, so I'm actually based. That's always a tough question because really I'm based on United. I always say it's 0 bedroom, 6 bath because I'm typically on a plane. But all of my things currently live in Santa Monica, California. I moved from the Bay Area actually very recently, the end of last year.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I suppose you will be joining us in Paris at some point, July this year,
Yes.
for Metaverse Summit. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, the summer is I do a lot of traveling. I spend a fair amount of time in Europe, spring and summer. So I look forward to seeing everybody live. Hopefully, fingers crossed that we're not on lockdown again.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we will have a lot of in-person meetings, but also in Metaverse. So that's
Yes,
a good day.
absolutely.
Could you tell us more about all those years, your observations around the VR, AR, XR, whatever we've been calling it all those years?
Yes, yes, and I love that you bring that up, that it's AR, VR, MR, and XR, and there's a lot of terminology, and now we're hearing about the metaverse, we're hearing about Web 3.0, and I think it's very confusing to a lot of people. I actually started in VR, virtual reality, back in 2013. And I actually started my company, Endeavor VR. Now we're called Endeavor XR in 2015, because when I first saw virtual reality, I wasn't really thinking about, the metaverse and, because the metaverse has existed, right? We feel like it just dropped out of the sky because Facebook changed their name to Meta, but the metaverse has been around for a very long time. And you could argue that the very first metaverse was Second Life, which was developed by Philip Rosedale and his partner, and those spun out into different virtual environments. But when I first saw VR, I was thinking how valuable it could be for business, for things like healthcare, for things like training, which virtual reality has been used for decades. So, to me, the metaverse isn't just this place or thing. It's really about an evolution about how we interact, how we learn, how we play, really how we do everything. So I think it's a very expansive technology. And I think Web 3.0 and the metaverse, I think they actually coincide a lot, because I really look at the metaverse as just layers of data that are around us all the time, living and breathing, and we just access it at different levels in different mechanisms. So yes, we can be in a fully immersed virtual world, or we can just be accessing layers of data through wearables that kind of seamlessly blend with the physical environment, which is more of a mixed reality. But I kind of think of all of those as, essentially the 3D web.
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely feel you because I've been in the industry for a couple of years with other observations around either the corporate acquisition of the AR, VR, and all kinds of metaverse startups, or the internal development in a lot of big tech companies around VR, AR, and um, maybe Web3 infrastructure as well. So it's definitely emerging. But now today, when we're talking about it, it's like all the stars starting to align, right? So I'm really excited about the current phenomenon as well. But maybe a lot of people, especially people from the industry, from the companies, they are quite confused. They're like, okay, so this is like the new internet. How can we see the opportunity? How can we position ourselves? So could you tell us more about your opinion or your experience or insights around it?
Yes, absolutely. My concern is that a lot of brands in particular are steaming in because there's this hype cycle about the metaverse. And they're thinking, great, we have to set up, v-commerce stores. We have to have these digital environments and we have to sell digital goods. And really, to me, that's a very small kind of 1.0 version of what the opportunity of this technology is. And really the way that we advise brands is not to just go in and plant your flag and say now we're going to be in the metaverse. I've seen articles where people say, oh, you need a chief metaverse officer. You do not need a chief metaverse officer. What you need is a really good strategy on how you want to engage your customer. And what I'm promoting is a one-to-one relationship with your consumers that is around an open and transparent exchange of data for value. So what I mean by that is, companies and brands spend millions and even billions of dollars a year on marketing and advertising. And part of that expense is actually harvesting data about people that, we've unfortunately inadvertently given away. What I'm proposing is that instead of kind of going behind our back, and it becomes this kind of very negative approach when you're sort of taking data and you're saying, well, no, but we're using that data to present you products that you might care about. But what if you go directly to the consumer and say, we would like to query these data points, and if you give us access, you are going to get certain access from us, or you're going to get better deals, or we're going to actually just pay you in cryptocurrency, right? A microtransaction. And all of this can happen automatically, seamlessly through a very simple interface. And those interfaces are being built now, and they're around identity, and the gaming world is already building these types of identities that can kind of prove who you are and will allow you to sort of have a digital wallet. And so then the next stage is just that interface where you query data. The reason I'm promoting this is that we have seen the detrimental effect of marketing to people and actually making them feel as if they need a product or service, or otherwise their lives are going to fall flat, right? And it's sort of gained all of this steam and a lot of attention, and we know who the big companies are who have been doing this. But the companies who I think will win in the metaverse are the ones who go fully transparent. And I think consumers will really embrace it. And it also allows consumers, sort of everyone, to be an influencer in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely mentioned one of the core points about Web3, let's say, user-centric and decentralized, and respecting user privacy, etc. But also, like, recently, especially, we observed a lot of let's say, retail companies doing acquisitions of land, building their flagship stores in different metaverses. It's become kind of like a magic formula, kind of have their store and make a big news so people can visit it. Do you think it's the beginning of something big, or do you think like there's maybe something more to build? Because metaverse is a place where you can build everything instead of building something magic. The brands, they're just building buildings, right? So
Yeah.
what do you think about it?
I love that you said that, because I'm a big believer, why do we want to just build a mirror of what we already have, right? This is this opportunity to really engage the customer with an experience, right? And how do you experience a brand, and how do you experience, digital goods? And how does that experience then kind of blend with the physical world? And I think that again, that's why I caution brands who are just going in and kind of building these big spaces, like you said. I mean, what's the point? I can go to Fifth Avenue and go into some of the most beautiful stores in the world, right? And so really what we need to get to, what I would say is that, we don't need to build this mirror of what we have in the physical world already, right? We need to think more broadly. And I think what consumers are looking for, aside from the transparency, is something that's experiential. And, yes, in a way aspirational, but I think there's an opportunity for brands to really engage with consumers and actually have this data sharing as this two-way street, but also not just each individual consumer's data, but really what they want from a brand. And maybe there's an opportunity, we've already seen there's a lot of customization, especially from some of the sportswear brands. Nike in particular does a great job of being able to customize any of their sneakers and things like that. But even beyond that, for consumers to be able to make a brand truly their own with customization, and you can do that in the digital realm really easily. The other trend that we're seeing a lot, and I think that brands should really capitalize on, is this true creator community. It's really broad, and there are all kinds of creators there, creating their own environments, creating digital goods and digital assets. And so, how can brands start to capture those creators and actually make their consumers creators as well, and make them part of the brand journey and conversation?
Mm-hmm.
I had a question regarding this, what you said with brands going into the metaverse, but trying to replicate the real world, so creating a virtual store. We've also seen virtual experiences of virtual offices, and it seems to be the first thing that brands do. What would you say in regards to that? Do you think that it is a mistake for a brand to rush into the metaverse, so to speak? So just, going in and creating a shop, even though it might not be that interesting? Or do you think that they should take a step back? And do you think that brands should wait until they can really offer something that's special, that's really crafted for the metaverse? Or do you think that there's a benefit into just going into the space, seeing what happens? What would be your advice in that regard?
Well, I mean, my advice is to take some time and be more thoughtful about it. However, I do understand that there are pressures for brands, and no one wants to miss the boat. But what I will say is, like I said at the beginning, is that the metaverse is an evolution, right? And I think I've said this before, that it's really a journey. It's not a destination. And so it's not like it's here now, right? And it's going to go away, or they're going to miss something. It is going to constantly evolve and change. And we saw this a little bit with augmented reality. And this is what the one thing that I will caution is that when AR first came out, in mobile AR, and mobile AR admittedly isn't the best experience, because you're holding up this phone and you're trying to kind of, capture your digital object, and it doesn't necessarily interact with the real world. And brands, again, steamed in and built these augmented reality experiences. There was really only one that I thought was actually really cool, and that was Pepsi Max in London. Took over a bus stand, and they put augmented glass, so that when you were on one side of the glass, you would see all these creatures on the other side of the glass. And that I thought was really interesting, and it was fun. But they spent a lot of money, and this is the challenge, is that there'll be a lot of money spent and there won't be the ROI, because consumers aren't going to spend all day in headsets yet, right? We're not going to be, so even in offices, like, we have maybe 1 or 2 meetings a week in a virtual environment, and that's it. So again, I caution, and really the focus shouldn't be about creating the space in the metaverse, but creating the experience for the consumer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the metaverse, right? It can start with doing something kind of interesting in store, kind of combining the physical and the digital. Again, this transparent exchange of data, I think, is really interesting, and creating these one-to-one relationships. A lot of companies have moved to a direct-to-consumer model as part of their channel strategy and their omnichannel strategy. And I think looking at that and expanding upon that, because that to me is the path to revenue. Just creating a virtual store. They have a virtual store, right? If you have a website, you have a virtual store, right? So are people really going to buy more putting on a headset? That remains to be seen. There's a lot of engagement for sure, and there's certainly engagements, a lot more engagement for web-based stores that have 3D goods. But I do think, Alvaro, you make a good point that having a smart strategy and executing it slowly over the next few years, to me, is much smarter than just rushing in and planting a flag and selling digital goods. And I really caution against minting NFTs because the value there is so volatile, and you could have a lot of consumers actually lose a lot of money. And that is not going to be good for brands who have kind of engaged in that particular practice. An NFT for me is about origin, it's about art, it's about creation, and it's about the evolution of creation, so that people are creating on top of an NFT, but you can trace that kind of creative spark all the way back to the beginning. And that exact kind of construct can start with a product from the very beginning, from the design phase, from the designers within a brand, and how it evolves over time. And then once it becomes consumer facing, that journey of that particular product or experience can then kind of continue and grow with input from everybody who interacts with that particular brand or product.
Yeah, definitely agree with what you said, because we saw kind of the NFT launch of Adidas, a lot of friction. So among the community, people aren't getting it, right? So it's kind of risky for brands to do that. But everybody, of course, also want to be the front runner in terms of innovation, in terms of user acquisition in this part. So maybe you can also walk us through how the brand saw this during those years, because you've been maybe helping brands and being the VR AR go-to person and consultant during a couple of years, and brands are adjusting maybe their strategy vis-a-vis like digital marketing, also like doing internal R&D, choosing either agencies or external startups to do that. So what are their approach during those years, and what can be the future approach for them?
Yeah, I think any brand who is looking at this as a consumer first endeavor, as opposed to how are we going to make more money from the metaverse? And I know they have stock prices and shareholders that they have to answer to, but really it's going to be about each individual customer. And again, having that one-to-one relationship and really providing value, and value from the standpoint that it is kind of accretive to somebody's life or lifestyle, as opposed to being just an object of desire. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of products that we have been trained to pay a lot of money for because of the brand associated with it. And I do see the next generations are starting to look at these kind of luxury brands and think, this isn't really valuable for me. This isn't really how I identify. And so really creating an experience where people can make, again, a product much more their own. And you're not just paying for the sake of paying for something that you're gonna make you feel good because you paid a lot of money for it, but because that company has the same values that you do. That company is aggressively, not just as a marketing strategy, but aggressively working towards the things you care about, like to use the cliche, the Silicon Valley cliche, making the world a better place.
Yeah. Also, talking about brands, we're talking about like previously established brand, let's say like Adidas or LVA bags or any other stuff. But there are some emerging digital only, or let's say metaverse only brands. And sometimes I'm thinking maybe people who are avatars in the metaverse, they want something extravagant. They want something imaginary. They want something that is different from the retail brand, H&M, Zara, they have in real life. So what do you think of that? Are they competitors with each other, the new brands, digital-only brands, and the traditional retailers, or can they be compatible, or they are living in two different worlds anyway?
Yeah, I think there's some complexity to it, but I think that something that is very interesting is that some of the creators who are digital only creators, not necessarily associated with brands. It's something I would target is not considered high end, but they did something that was really interesting about a decade ago, and they started partnering with really high end designers and very cool kind of up and coming designers to offer those kinds of much more accessible, kind of budget friendly, but well designed items. And that was quite successful. And when we look at what the opportunity is, I think the opportunity is for artists and creators and producers of some of these beautiful digital assets should be partnering with some of the brands. And again, not just celebrity driven and not just influencer driven, but artist driven, and really offer people, because I do too. Like, I think all of us have spent, whenever we've done sort of a digital version of ourselves, I've spent time, making sure that I liked my outfit, and I try on different shoes and bags and so forth. So I do enjoy that. But it's not about the brand per se. I think it's really about how it makes you feel, and gives you the opportunity to present yourself in a way that you may not be able to in real life. And so I think that it's going to be this kind of blend between how the brands work with creative artists and start to open up their design ethos to a much broader audience who could potentially be their customers as well.
When you mentioned this, because this is a very interesting topic, right? The idea that you would have on the metaverse, you'd have fashion that is specific to the metaverse, because you can be anything. We all remember, I think, when VR chat became big, and suddenly, what do people want to be in VR chat? Well, they're being like very weird Sonic the Hedgehog, or cartoon characters, and things like that. Perhaps in a metaverse environment, things will be toned down, but we can expect that people will be expressing themselves in more radical ways than real life. You were mentioning the fact that brands could work with creators and broaden up their design perspectives to include this. Do you also think that brands will expand more? Because, for example, if you're mentioning a brand like, let's say, Adidas, Adidas works with very specific items in real life, but really in the metaverse, they could work with anything. And at the same time, people will perhaps maybe want to be more expand their expression beyond just wearing shoes, for example. Maybe it's a complete outfit, maybe it's a different creature. So do you think that the metaverse will make it so that brands will rethink their DNA in the metaverse? Or do you think that, Adidas will just make shoes in the metaverse and that's it? And maybe they will incorporate some elements like letting designers submit their own designs, but just stop there. So what do you think about this dynamic with user creations and the possibilities that are made available in the metaverse?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, because it's really going to be kind of a consumer question. Do we want to have, let's say, this amazing gown for an event? Maybe we're going to a fundraiser in a virtual environment, and we want this amazing gown. Do we want that to be from Adidas, or do we want that to be from either a brand that we would associate with that, like a Gucci or a Prada, or you can name a million of them. And I think the Fabricant is doing some really, really interesting things around that, and I applaud a lot of the work that they're doing. But again, I think it's this great opportunity, and what made Second Life so interesting is that there was so much user-generated content. It was early days, and a lot of it wasn't great. But the beauty of kind of NFTs and this sort of origin story, and not around just this money grab, but really around an origin and creation story, that you can start to see creators start to have their own persona and start to create their own audience. If you think of it, like the difference between a SoundCloud and a Spotify, for example. Spotify kind of bridges that gap between, individual creators and then sort of, the very, well-known musicians and bands. You know, SoundCloud is interesting because someone who's just making great music in their basement can suddenly have an audience. And so if you think of that as an example, I think that there's going to be this opportunity for both these individual creators to start to create a name for themselves, and then for brands to either embrace these individual creators or to create their own new look. But I do think that in the beginning, they're going to want to stay pretty close to what they're known for in the physical world to, to answer your question specifically. But then they'll, we'll see whether they decide that they want to branch out. But that's really going to be down to how the consumers interact with their brand in the virtual spaces.
And do you think that individual creators could represent a risk to brands in the sense that they could be competition if brands do not incorporate that into their strategy? Do you think that individual creators could actually take the upper hand and establish an ecosystem where people would actually prefer to have items that are created by people, the designers which are popular, contrary to brands that are popular in real life?
Yeah. So, I would like to even just step back even from that question and not think of the metaverse as a realm for competition. And that is really counterintuitive. And it's really, really difficult for a brand or retailer who's in the business of selling goods. We've created this competitive, market environment, this kind of, especially, this sort of capitalistic environment in the Western world. But if we approach the metaverse, and without getting, too philosophical, as a land of abundance, then we don't think of, this idea that there's competition. And it's really where I think NFTs will also start to shine, when it's not about how much you paid for something and, its value, but really the story behind how it was created and the values of the people who sort of, touched that product along the way. Because the metaverse is infinite. So when you think of something as being infinite, why is there competition? Why would there need to be competition? Granted, there's a mechanism. There's really, there's enough for everyone. There will be a mechanism for everyone to get paid. And I look at the value system as well, which I think has to change. So right now, an asset or a real physical good has a price. And everybody pays that price. Maybe you go to one store, you pay a little less. When you go to another, you pay a little more. But essentially, it has a price. In the metaverse, we have the opportunity to rethink value even. So, for example, let's say I produce, a great hat, a digital hat, and I may choose to sell it to you, Yingxi, because I really believe in what you're doing here and that you're promoting the metaverse, and I like your values. And you have said, I actually am being very frugal this month, so this is what I'm willing to pay. And then that we decide between the two of us. And maybe you share a few data points that tell me who you are and what a great person you are. And I'm willing to sell to you for a particular price. Then maybe there's someone else who is very, let's say, brand centric, isn't necessarily really aligned with my values as a person or as a creator. I may be willing to sell to them. I may not be willing to sell to them, or I may be, sell to them at a much higher price. And we can start to choose what the data points are that will change the value for us as sellers. And it's a hard concept to think about because it's hard to project then, right? What your sales are going to be and in this business construct. But all of that will start to make sense as we allow for this fluidity of value, because right now it's all nebulous anyway, right? We're just making up the value of a digital good. And we've seen how that works in games where you have some skins that are really valuable and some that aren't. But that's really arbitrary, right? So we can see how that might happen with other digital goods.
Exactly. As you said, the metaverse kind of illimited. However, the scarcity, the rarity of a thing, a digital asset, or a virtual land, let's say, that is owned by Snoop Dogg, those are rare stuff. And we are transitioning from the, let's say, old-fashioned attention economy where the brands are dependent on the, let's say, the tech giants, Google's, Facebook's, Amazon's for kind of the advertising and the like users' attention to make them pay. And now they are kind of building it on top of the metaverse. Do you think like the brands will kind of be controlled or be dependent on the new metaverse landlords, or should they actually build their own technology and virtual world and the metaverses and apps?
Yeah, well, what I'd like to see is the game engines start to allow that mechanism that I talked about for that kind of one-to-one relationship with their consumers. And both the primary game engines, Unity and Unreal, have some of that functionality already built in. And then as we're able to take more and more control of our own identity and our own data, we will be able to then kind of gate our data, and we'll be much more in control in this kind of decentralized landscape. And I almost grin when we talk about scarcity in the digital landscape, because really, it's what we're telling ourselves, but it isn't. It's infinite. It's like saying, oh, yes, a domain name is isn't effectively an NFT, right? It's a one of a kind, but websites aren't. You can take any other domain name and you can build a website, and that's sort of infinite, right? We can build infinite websites. What I would like to see is, and it is going to be a challenge, because I think big tech is going to be very much against this. I think everyone's going to want to have their own metaverse, but think how kind of confusing that's going to be. And so having this sort of decentralized construct where people can have interconnected spaces, right? So that you can teleport between spaces, much like you move between websites now, right? As you're surfing. So you imagine you're sort of surfing the metaverse. That will be that, but that will have to be in sort of a decentralized landscape if we don't want to give up control. And the technical implications of that are challenging, as we're discovering that now. I'm with a group called XR Guild, and we're looking at a lot of these kind of decentralized constructs, even just for building an organization and voting, and really to have equal and fair distribution of power amongst all the members. And it's technically very challenging, but the good news is we have some really, really smart people working on solving that problem, who are motivated by this notion of the individual and individual control, individual identity, and individual power of their own data.
That's fantastic news. And then we are definitely looking forward to more news around the XR Guild, empowering more creators, emerging projects, and we can also get maybe the voting right as kind of the participant. And so talking about the guild, maybe you can also mention your opinion around the decentralized autonomous organizations. Is it gonna be kind of the organizational model, governance model of the future metaverses, or is it gonna have impact directly already in our real life, in our maybe investment model in terms of XR technology?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to think about. One of the companies that I'm an advisor for, Crucible, which is run by a brilliant gentleman by the name of Ryan Gill, has just set up a DAO, which also has its own complexities. But this, we're starting to understand what this decentralized landscape looks like, and how we can manage it globally so that we don't kind of lose the plot and the original intent, right, which is decentralized as opposed to centralized. I do see a lot of governments starting to move to the blockchain in an effort to have more seamless communication with their constituents. So I think that is a good use case, even though there's a centralized component to it. They're kind of leveraging the blockchain and identity almost as that sort of single sign-on mechanism, so that you have a much more seamless experience dealing with the government. So we're still in this kind of experimental phase on really what those structures are. But those problems will be solved, right? These are tech problems, and these are kind of construct problems and interoperability issues that are solvable. But we really need people, and when I say people, I mean individuals. Us as individuals, we already saw Apple said, give us the option for do not track, right? We need to start to use our voice, our voices, and demand our data back, and demand these interfaces that allow us to manage our data and to potentially even monetize our own data. And I think it's going to be, an uphill battle for a long time, because it's another thing that we have to think about. But I think we need to prioritize what we want the future to look like. And I think, having, brands and big tech tell us what to think and what to do and what to like, that's not how we should allow our world going forward. And this is really, for me, what the opportunity of the metaverse is. And brands going in, can go in. Everyone's going to make money. Let's not worry about that. There's plenty of money to go around. Again, especially if we look at this as abundance as opposed to scarcity. But let's be transparent, and let's change the way we do things for the better, and really put humanity first, and put the individual first.
Yeah, thank you, Amy, for sharing those insights, experience, and maybe last but not least, some predictions. So what do you think about 2022? Can you give some maybe bold predictions in 2022 in terms of metaverse innovations, not only maybe XR, but also NFTs, blockchains, and beyond?
Yeah, well, I just came from CES, where I've seen some interesting wearables are coming, and we know Apple and Facebook are working on their next gen wearables. Reportedly will be much more of sort of a VR device with pass-through capability to give it that sort of mixed reality sense. But we are on a path to true wearables, where initially it'll be more of a heads-up display, where we're just accessing the data that we typically look down and check on our phones, so for directions and quick texts and things like that. But in the next few years, we are going to have a wearable that will give us this mixed reality that is truly wearable, that looks much more like this. But in 2022, I'm actually going to move from prediction to creation, because we're always in this cycle of like, what's coming, and let's skate to where the puck is. Well, let's actually place the puck where we want to go, and stop trying to predict what the future is going to be, and start actually building a future that, again, is not dictated by big tech, but is really this vision of what we want our lives to be moving forward. And let's simulate that. Let's do some interesting modeling. Like, we have AI, we have these digital environments. We can model the most aspirational, interesting versions of what our lives can be. We're thinking a little bit too small, in my mind. And so I would say my prediction for 2022, at least if I have my way and enough people, believe and agree with what I'm saying, that we all start to actually be much more proactive in our future. And let's all be creators. We all have the ability to be creators and builders, and to really be active. And instead of spending so much time, and I'm a big fan of TikTok. I've lost many hours to it, and social media in general. Spend a little bit of time just kind of thinking about what you want the future to look like, and what would be fun, and something that even we haven't imagined yet, because that's really what the metaverse, that's what the opportunity is.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said, and that is also why we are doing this Metaverse Summit, to like showcase the entrepreneurs, talk with interesting people. And it's funny that you mentioned the Fabricant and the Crucible. I interviewed also both of the founders. Amazing projects, amazing people, and I agree. Let's build something. And even though me personally not building something, a product right now. I'm trying to connect people who are building and who are investing, also interviewing you, who has so many interesting insights for brands and for creators, for the whole industry, right? So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you are a builder. This is a product. This is a metaverse product. Just putting information and ideas out there that has incredible value. So you are a builder.
Yeah, the
And it's interesting as well.
builder.
It's interesting as well to mention the fact that there are so many opinions on the metaverse. It's still a very fluid thing, and people. It's interesting to have all of these interviews as well because people will actually sometimes have diverging opinions, and so we have to remain very open-minded because it's very difficult to know what's going to happen. And so this is why I think it's also interesting to have this attitude of saying it's not about what is going to happen. It's about what I want to happen. So people we'll all have our opinions on what the metaverse is or should be, and maybe this is what's important, what we want that to be, and what are the values that we want to transfer to that space.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I always joke that I say if you interview 10 people and you ask them what their definition of the metaverse is, you're going to get 25 opinions because everyone has about 2.5 versions of what they think the metaverse is. So yeah, let's make it what we want it to be.
Definitely. Thank you again, Amy, for the conversation, and looking forward to seeing you in real life as well in Paris or somewhere in the world.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. That was super interesting.